this next research paper is one that Aidan Paladin drew my attention to, and this is the only one in the whole contemplations where I've taken that lead. But I thought it was an interesting one because of the implications.
The implication.
Unintentionally quoting Always Sunny in Philadelphia there, aren't I? But it's titled Each is to Count for One and None for More Than One, Predictors of Support for Economic Redistribution. This is from 2021, and I'm just going to read from the abstract to give you a brief summary before I go through some of the methodology. So, while theory predicts fairness, motivates support for redistribution, tests have yielded near zero effects. Here we propose the relevant evolved fairness motive operates within the community sharing relation. This is very jargony, by the way. Experienced as a unity motive to treat all as one and none for more than one. Study 1 supported this model with a moderate significant effect of communal fairness measured on support for redistribution incremental to effects of compassion. This is so wordy, there's no point me reading it, and I should just explain what happens, really, shouldn't I?
Just to make it a bit clearer, yeah.
I do forget how jargony this can be. So, yes, they're trying to test for what makes up the motivation for the redistribution of resources. That's what they're trying to do, ultimately.
Yeah, is it a sense of genuine community love where you want actual fairness with the people around you, or is it something else?
So there's a little extract from the introduction that I thought was worth mentioning briefly. They say, here we approach fairness from the context of relationship regulation theory, testing if communal fairness, treating all members of one's moral circle, including the self and family, as one, fills the role predicted within the three-person evolutionary motivational model. So yes, they're looking at it from this particular lens, whereby treating yourself, basically thinking collectively about you and your social circle, whether that predicts your willingness to redistribute resources. So their methodology was they measured using lots of different Likert scales, which is like rate between 1 and 5 or 1 and 7, how much you agree with this statement. And I'm not going to go over all of them because there are lots of different ones. Needless to say, they're ones that have been proved to be statistically robust. But yes, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over the methodology. But yes, they just gave lots of questionnaires and people filled them out, and then they looked at the relationship between them. So in the first part of the study, here is the results on screen now. And one point that is worth mentioning, this is very petty and shows that I've spent too much time researching this, is they've used a t-test here, which is a type of statistical test to compare two different groups. And they've got multiple groups here, and I personally would have used a ANOVA because there are more than 3 groups, which allows you to build a model and tell how much they would fit together. But they've just compared each hypothesis with the null hypothesis. So how much does this predict a certain amount of this compared to not at all, rather than trying to get how much do all of these tie into one model.
Okay, so it's kind of relative to a presumed ideal rather than relative to one another. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure. What do you mean?
The results that they're getting.
Okay, so yes, they're standalone. So say malicious envy or self-interest, they're not necessarily part of the same model in how they've presented the results. They've just tested them against whether they explain the results or not, or part of the results or not, is the better way of putting it, I think. I hope that's clear.
I'm still a bit lost, to be perfectly honest.
So ideally, you would want to analyse these statistically and see how they all fit together. But rather than doing that, what they've done is they've just compared it to whether these dimensions are a factor or not.
Oh, okay.
Trying to simplify it as much as possible.
So, just to confirm, the higher the number, the more of a factor it was?
Yeah, so the only number you really need to look at here is the one immediately after the dimension, so the 0 point figure, and I think this represents a percentage of variance. So, for example, age and sex don't seem to be good predictors. And also, of course, they need to be statistically significant.
And compassion seems to basically be nothing at all.
Mm-hmm. Although it doesn't look like that's actually a statistically significant finding. But the bottom 4 are the ones in bold. So malicious envy was significant and seemed to account for about 26% of variance. Self-interest was 19%, communal fairness 15%, and instrumental harm 21%. So yes,
that paints a picture.
So it's interesting to me that the negative aspects, the negative motivations of self-interest, malicious envy, and instrumental harm, which, by the way, instrumental harm is the one that's not as intuitive. It's a willingness to cause harm in order to bring about the greater good. Not to quote Hot Fuzz. So yes, all of those are somewhat concerning, aren't they? And this is just measuring a willingness to redistribute resources. Well, genuine compassion is not really a motivating factor at all. It's all about envy, self-interest. Communal fairness is supposedly important, but not nearly as much as harming people who you think are bad for your own self-interest.
So it's confirming the classic, you don't care about the poor, you just hate the rich.
Yes, absolutely. It's pretty
Ancient
harrowing.
wisdom vindicated yet again.
Mm-hmm. So if we move to the second study, here we have some items that were measured for support for coercive redistribution. So item 1, the government should impose a brief period of oppression to carry out a transfer of wealth from the better-offs to the less well-off. Item 2, the government should, using force where needed, control the economy in order to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor. 3, the wealthy must understand that harm done to them is morally necessary as collateral damage in redistributing wealth. And 4, the government should forcibly redistribute wealth from those who have more resources to those who have fewer resources. And 5, if the wealthy try to avoid tax, it would be permissible to use mild torture to reveal the money they are hiding from the poor.
Jesus Christ.
Let's look at the results, shall we? There they are. So what we're seeing here is the predicted coercion on the bottom there and the support for coercive redistribution at the top. And what you can see is all those dots represent the participants' answers, I think. And the line is, of course, showing the general relationship. And it could be a little bit stronger, but it's somewhat clear that there's a linear relationship between these things. So when assessed on dimensions of, well, do you want to torture the rich to get money out of them? If they're more supportive of coercive redistribution, then yes. I mean, of just redistribution in general, I imagine. Adding the coercive word on both axes seems a little bit redundant.
Yeah.
But yes, it's pretty harrowing results, isn't it? That look at that person in, say, the top right-hand corner there. I wouldn't want to meet them.
That's just Stalin right there, I assume.
Yeah, well, Joseph Stalin himself took the time to answer this study, apparently.
Thanks for taking time out of your afterlife, wherever you are, Mr. Stalin.
But yeah, this is a pretty depressing and harrowing finding that, yes, they really are as evil as we seem to think they are. Oh, it's not good. So let's see what the researchers have to say about their study. They're not quite as catastrophizing as me, to be fair. They say the research had 3 main findings. First, in 2 pre-registered studies, it supported and replicated a role for communal fairness on support for distribution. I mean, yes, they did find that communal fairness had an effect, but it was the lesser of the 4. The selfish ones came first. Second, it confirmed the effects of envy, compassion, and self-interest on support for redistribution. I'm not sure about compassion, really. It was... I don't know whether they have the ability to conclude that.
I think by the measures that you were giving, it was 26% for envy, whereas it would have been 4% for compassion. So
it was also statistically insignificant as well.
Yeah,
so you can't attribute whether it's to chance or not, because it's such a small effect size that you actually need a much larger sample to establish whether it's by chance or not.
So they're actually just throwing that compassion in there kind of incorrectly.
In my opinion, although it would be a matter of debate.
The actual results that they got.
That would be my conclusion, but, you know, not everyone is...
They're probably trying to soften the blow for the leftists who read the study, you know?
Third, it extended understanding of these motives to account for support for coercive enforcement of redistribution. Jointly, the final motivational model accounted for over 40% of variance in support for redistribution and over 30% of variance in willingness to coerce compliance with redistribution. So that's just, they're able to test statistically how much are these factors that we measured affecting the total possible amount of individual variance in support for coercive redistribution, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So our main aim was to find a form of fairness which is strongly and reliably linked to support for redistribution. Here we found communal fairness, the impartial attitude towards all persons' pleasure and well-being, had a significant effect on support for redistribution. This finding supports the model of regulating community sharing relations via a motive, supporting the group by treating others as a unity via impartial/indifferent choices. So what that's saying is it supports that view of seeing your social circle as a collective, as not necessarily being separate to you as an individual. And second, while most resource reallocation requires willingness to coerce, this has received less attention. Here we found reliable evidence for effects of instrumental harm, but also of communal fairness, envy and self-interest, enhancing willingness to coerce. We also found that unlike these motives, compassion, while strongly motivating support for redistribution, neither motivated nor protected against coercion. So yes, willingness to coerce, not motivated by any sort of compassion. No compassion for the people they're trying to coerce, in other words.
Not that surprising.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.